Hi, this podcast is brought to you by Able Training Support Limited, who deliver over 250 engaging and informative training courses to settings that care for or educate adults or children. They deliver face-to-face, virtual and e-learning courses across the UK, and they specialise in courses around understanding people and improving practice. Visit able-training.co.uk for more information. Okay, welcome to the Able to Care podcast, episode 3, I believe this is. So welcome back from myself, Andy Baker, head trainer and managing director of Able Training, and my co-presenter, Nadine.
Hi.
So as far as number 3, thank you again so much for all the feedback we've had from the previous podcasts. We're really enjoying doing them and hoping we're going to keep them going. The one we're going to do this time is on a little bit more of a somber note, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that some people out there may be aware of, that there's been a Panorama program. Obviously, there's been a few Panorama scandals that have come out over the years. The famous one being Castlebeck, Winterbourne View in Bristol. There was a G4S one as well, wasn't there, as far as the young offenders environment. Where people have gone in with hidden cameras and raised awareness around abusive behaviour, inappropriate actions of staff and things like that. And unfortunately, there's been another recent one that came first aired in September and it's only available on YouTube. It's called Undercover Hospital Patients at Risk, and it's about a mental health hospital or a mental health unit within an NHS trust in Endenfield in Manchester. And it's raised a lot of concerns, and somebody's gone in with a hidden camera and found lots of, I suppose, inappropriate is probably the most kind of diplomatic way of putting it. Actions of staff and an unhealthy culture and inappropriate actions and abuse. And obviously there has been a lot of people who lost their job around this. And again, it's just been another episode that's drawn people's attention to that something's not right in the way that we're caring for people with mental health issues, learning disabilities, etc. Watching the documentary, I mean, we both sat and watched it last night as well. I think it's quite an emotive thing. I think it's both of us were upset by it and equally angry. I know my son Josh watched it as well, and he sort of described it as going, it was kind of disgusting to watch, and it upset him and made him angry as well. It's never nice to watch these particular programs, is it?
No, definitely not. I think one of the shocking things about it is that it's that realization that behavior actually still happens and exists today. Like, we're in 2022, especially within the care sector. Like, we're all for person-centered care, making sure people are looked after properly, and mental health is one of the most talked about subjects within media, those kinds of things. So it was kind of shocking to think that still exists like now. That we would have probably heard about that in like the 80s, and it'd have been relatively normal. I don't want to say that that's a good thing, obviously, but I think that's the shock, that like, how and why is it happening now?
100%. And I think it's that strange thing, isn't it, that, you know, within the class as a woke generation, the council culture or whatever it is, there's so many people who are upset about so many things now that you kind of think that the stuff that people get upset about use of language, about things in the media, about celebrities saying stuff, but then there's these things that are going on in environments that should care that people are ignoring, or not ignoring, but not aware of. And these are the things that maybe should really matter to people, of people actually experiencing genuine discrimination, abuse, and detrimental to their general emotional well-being due to ongoing, almost torturous and degrading behavior, rather than just getting upset by one thing. I think it's so different. It puts things into context and perspective a little bit sometimes.
Massively. And I think as well, as an organisation, I think we have a bit of an expectation on the NHS that they're there for us and they do right by us. And in those sorts of, you would think, imagine it from a personal point of view, like you're sending your child there to get and receive some help. This is an NHS organisation, so obviously they're going to have the best staff. Of course they are. Their health, like their care, they're everything at the heart of what care should be. And then I can't imagine the upset that the family members felt. I mean, we watched the reactions of them, and that was literally heartbreaking, that I've sent my family member or loved one into this this environment.
100%.
And it's you know, or they've been detained and been sent there. Now, if they're going there to get help and sort of rehabilitate and those kinds of things, fantastic. But their lives have got worse since being in there.
Yeah.
And that must just be so heartbreaking.
100%. 100%. One of the things I would sort of say is a bit of a proviso that obviously any TV program is going to kind of pick out the very worst. And I think there was some bits they showed in there that were kind of positive forms of care. One that we discussed and said we didn't feel it was positive.
Yeah.
But there was obviously some really good stuff there. And I always want to try and draw away from having that dichotomy of they must have been evil or the staff there must be evil. Because I think good people are very capable of behaving in bad ways.
It was very much cultured behaviour in there. So this is the way that we do things around here. And this, everybody does it. It's fine, because even those on a managerial scale, you know, they were behaving in such ways as well. So it's very much a cultural thing, massively.
My preferred definition of culture is a set of shared values, ideas, beliefs and etiquette belonging to an institution or group. And by that definition, it's just, again, you summarised it nicely, the way we do things around here, but it's the language we use, it's the way we behave, the way we think, it's the core values of the organisation, isn't it? And any new person's going to affect those values, open up new ideas. And I think sometimes you get a person coming in, well, I did this at my last place, so they refuse to engage in kind of positive cultures. Or it could be they've got some really good ideas, but well, this is the way we do things here. I've definitely found that as a trainer, and I know you have as well, where it's kind of you're offering look, there's a different way of going about this. Here's some ideas for you, but you get that immediate, oh, that won't work.
Yeah,
that won't work here.
We hear it a lot.
Absolutely, and it's not because they've been willing to try it. It's because they've just decided that our culture does not work around that. And we are not even going to try or explore how we could do that. We're going to put that immediate barrier in. And I think, again, that's where language comes into play, that rather than looking at we can't, it's like, how can we? Even if you have to adapt it based towards your culture, towards your setting, towards however way you work, by looking at it as a question of, well, how could we make that work rather than it wouldn't work, is a much more productive, solution-focused, positive and person-centered way of exploring it.
One thing just on the one staff member side of things, it can usually just take one staff member to change a whole culture. So this is the way that I did it at my other place, or this is what we do here, and those kinds of things. So I hear that a lot, that one staff member can affect the whole workplace culture. And it's like a domino effect. So when one person starts doing particular behaviours, the next person will. And you see that quite a lot within this documentary. So the swearing, the language. Imagine, so some service users enjoy, and I've come across these a few swear words here and there every now and again, okay? Now, that can easily be translated over to a staff member. This is acceptable because this is the way that they like being spoken to. Very quickly, like wildfire, it then becomes derogatory to the service user. So it's no longer a shared thing. It's not an in common thing, like, oh, I've been had enough, and those like, it's not an F and F, it's more towards the service user. And I noticed with those, they all seem to swear in front of and about and call them names to the service user. So you can see that domino effect of thinking it's so easy for it just to be okay because other people are doing it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So there's a few things related to culture, just kind of, so there's a principle called pluralistic ignorance. And pluralistic ignorance is that even though I don't think this is right, nobody else seems to be saying it's wrong, so I must be the one that's wrong. So this is a principle of form of cognitive bias. And the thing is, if I'm thinking, well, I don't think this is right, but nobody else is saying it's wrong, so maybe I'm wrong. But if everybody is thinking exactly the same thing and nobody's speaking up, then everybody may think that the behavior is wrong. Everybody may recognize it as inappropriate. You definitely saw that as one of the quotes going, oh, we get away with murder here. They knew it was wrong, but it was that case of, but nobody else is saying it's wrong.
There was a couple of instances though. So I think one of the nurses, I don't know if we should say a name or whatever, but one of the nurses was being really quite derogatory.
I'll give you a straw bed. My cows have to sleep on. What? It's life, isn't it? It's what they do.
And I heard one of the staff members say, Cheryl, you shouldn't say that. And she was like, well, what? I am.
once she said something like that, there's an element of now I've got to stick with it.
And I've got to back it up.
I've got to back it up.
And she did.
Yeah.
She backtracked, so she still made it derogatory to the service user. But, well, it's true though, isn't it? Cows do sleep on haystacks. So, okay, that makes it all right then. But she's talking about a service user, which is obviously completely wrong.
100%.
Yeah.
So, I think a great example of plurality of ignorance I get people to think about is when you've got an organisation where they're running a fire drill and the fire alarm goes off and this member of staff stood here looking across at other members of staff going, well, they don't seem to be leaving the building. So maybe this is a drill and nobody told me. Mm-hmm. But then what's actually happening is though other member of staff are looking at that first member of staff going, well, they don't seem to be leaving. Maybe it's a drill and nobody told us.
Yeah.
And that's when then nobody leaves, nobody acts, nobody does anything.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a peer pressure principle of we are social animals. So we want to try and fit in. We want to act like others are acting.
Yeah.
And numerous kind of when we're looking at the good and evil, so the famous Stanford prison experiment that most people will have come across, where they took about 24 people, they created a fake prison where they made 12 of them prisoners and 12 of them prison guards, and they had to abandon the experiment in less than a week because the guards had started to become torturous and abusive. And the prisoners had started to become defiant and difficult and were being subordinate. Okay, and they started to fall into these roles where they started acting in this particular way, and the behavior, the experiment had to be abandoned because it was getting to the point where the guards were behaving torturously. They were torturing the individuals, even though these were perfectly normal people, from similar walks of life. They weren't actually prisoners, but they just started to fall into these roles of being authority and subordinate and acting in certain ways. And that can be seen. I noticed a real similarity in that. It's a very versus situation. The culture was, it's us versus them.
Yeah.
They're the patients, we're the staff. They're the problem, we're the solution.
Yeah.
And it was very much kind of, it wasn't a us and them versus their challenges, their difficulties, their mental health needs and stuff like that. It was they are the bad, we are the good.
Nobody was on those service users' side. No. Nobody was.
Definitely not in the examples that we're shown in the video there.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few specific examples that we could kind of refer to. So obviously there was a lot of focus in the film on a particular young lady called Harley, which is okay as I mentioned her name. I'm sure we're okay to mention her name. So her diagnosis, which she was on the autistic spectrum, and also she demonstrated self-harming behavior. Mm-hmm. And I think Harley was one of the ones that throughout the entire documentary, they kept kind of coming back to her a little bit of numerous situations that were heart-wrenching. I think the language used towards Harley, I think they used terms like,
why did she get sent here? Okay. Do you know?
She's a cunt.
If we're getting rid of her, that means they're bad for her.
Do you know what? She's the cancer of the ward. It needs cutting out.
Send her to prison. Forgive me, but that's what she needs, a good thrashing.
We're looking at this from an external point of view.
Yeah.
Harley may be a very complex young lady, and she may pose a lot of challenges for the staff and be frustrating and difficult, and the same as we all can be. And that's not to be derogatory to her in the slightest. And it doesn't excuse anything that happened to her. But one of the things that I think you could hear in all the language, in all the kind of reference to her, it was all focused on her negatives. And one of the things we generally try and promote when we're teaching and working in settings is focusing on that positive. Is we are never one thing. We are never evil, difficult, lazy. There's times we're motivated and we work hard, and there's times we sit on a bum and do nothing. So are we lazy permanently, or are we just, it's not that we are lazy, it's that lack of motivation for certain things.
I think one of them, so just in regarding to her case, I think it became really apparent of their feelings towards her because of how often she was put into seclusion and then left in seclusion. I think, again, one of the most upsetting things about that is that Harley was very aware. She had a big awareness that they don't like me. She felt that from the staff members. She knew that they didn't like her. I know they're trying to break, like some of the words that Harley was saying to me, like, so they're trying to break me. They left her in seclusion for 20 days straight.
Yeah.
That, I just think, is one of the most upsetting, heartbreaking things. And I think, and, at one point in the documentary, they said, well, the staff need a break. The staff need a break.
Yeah.
So just please leave her in seclusion.
Yeah.
She wasn't being secluded because she was in
danger to herself or others,
imminent
absolutely.
risk to
imminent risk. 100%.
So she was being left in there for the benefit of not herself but for the staff members. That's not what seclusion's for.
Yeah, 100%. One thing as I clocked on very early on is the guy who was actually doing the filming. He said he did a 1-day induction training before he was then on the floor, and I don't think he didn't mention any additional training that he'd done. So 1-day induction of what? Now again, he may have had previous experience, and that may have been considered.
May have done.
But how are you meant to work with people with complex needs if you don't understand those complex needs?
So speaking from experience, care is one of the easiest jobs to get. It's more the case of what shifts can you do? And that's me being completely honest.
Yeah.
And that is genuinely what shifts can you do? That person-centered care is
how flexible are you rather than
it's seriously a very easy job to get, and I really don't think it should be.
100%.
1,000%.
And I think that contributes to the culture. It's not held to a high value, potentially.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like you're highly valued, you're not going to act in a way that is valuable.
They're on minimum wage, so I think especially the healthcare support workers, like £9.50 an hour. And speaking from experience, it is a difficult job. It's really, really tough when you're trying to understand the needs of somebody. And you even as a staff team, it's like, we're not getting this right. What more can we do? It is really tough. It is a tough job.
There's one bit I'm just kind of thinking of when they're falsifying documents and stuff.
Yeah.
There's a bit in there where they're meant to be doing enhanced observations. They're meant to be kind of checking on the patients every 15 minutes. But there's a situation where somebody hasn't been checked for like 3 hours and stuff like that. In the case of there's a reason the risk assessment specifies for enhanced observations, but they were falsifying those records. And part of me that absolutely they're coercing others into it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But why? Where was the pressure coming from to falsify those records? And I think sometimes there's many places who make a rod for their own back, where if they're understaffed and not able to do those enhanced observations, isn't it better to go, we can't do those enhanced observations because we haven't got the staff,
meet that,
and therefore you are not providing an appropriate level of care within an organisation, rather than falsifying because they think they're going to get in trouble, then going, hey, we can manage. Look, we're still getting everything done, even though it's a skeleton crew. It's like a short-term solution creating that long-term problem.
Yeah.
And one of the things it was a physiotherapist friend of mine who attended a seminar, and he told me about it, where the lady sort of said, all physiotherapists in the room, and said, how are your caseloads? And they all said, we are absolutely jam-packed. We are working extra hours. We're working outside of our hours. And she said, okay, so let's say I've got a case, though, where I've got a young lad, cerebral palsy, needing a physiotherapist. He's desperately struggling at school. So who can fit him in? And they all sort of said that they would jostle round. They'd find somewhere squeezing him in. I said, but that's the problem. That even though you think you're doing something nice, the powers that be, the purse strings, are going to go, well, they're managing. They fitted it in. If they went, no, we can't take him. Our caseloads are full. We can't take him. They would have to then invest more into more physiotherapists to then go, well, we've got too many people.
Yeah.
And I see that in care sometimes where, because they genuinely care in some settings, even though they're lowered staff numbers, it's a case of, but we run around and get everything done, but the quality of the care that we provide is reduced.
I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, we stop being quite as person-centered, become more task-focused, we rush the clients, we get people up, and we manage to get all the jobs on the list done.
Yeah.
But the quality of the care, the person-centeredness has gone out the window a little bit.
So this is what management are hearing, aren't they? So you did manage to do it then, so you can do it.
Yeah.
Yes, I can, but everybody else is being affected by it.
100%.
But management in particular, I'm not saying all managers, there's some amazing care home or facility managers out there, but most of the time that's the case of, you managed to do all that. So it becomes really repetitive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is just, I think it's that need to care, isn't it? Or that need to make sure that person's okay. That if I don't look after them, or don't, if I've got 5 people that need support, I can't leave one of them waiting.
Yeah.
And because I'm trying to do it properly, I'm going to do it quick to try and make sure I fulfill all 5. And it's a short-term solution, but it adds to the long-term problem. And I think that's one of the challenges.
The speech is, and I've said this before myself, well, at least they've had the medication, at least they've managed to have breakfast, at least we've managed to get them dressed, but everything else in between has not been met.
So as far as the, I think that's the other thing, isn't it? As far as from the culture, there was another factor that we got from the documentary, and that was boundaries. And I know that recently we've been getting a lot of inquiries around courses, particularly around boundaries and stuff like that. And I think boundaries are not barriers is one thing I'd just kind of refer to. The boundaries are kind of a flexible, movable thing, but it's for the well-being of the clients. And when we're looking at like some of the boundaries in there, one is a kind of a sexualization of some of the relationships. Some of them was the language they were using in front, as you said, swearing in front of clients in a derogatory way, or referring to them as a third person when they were in the room. One was physical touch.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I say we will go on to the kind of restraint side of things, but the guy who pinched the woman, for example, the derogatory comments, but he was almost interacting with the service users in a similar way he was acting towards the other staff members. It was a case, except he perceived them as lower than himself.
Yeah, what do you do when she's like, I smack her head against the wall and all? Yeah.
He goes from laughing at Joanna to pinching her.
And he just leant over and pinched, like a real nasty, elongated pinch.
Minutes later, Steve does it again, this time in front of Nurse Hannah. He jokes about seeing Joanna naked.
I don't want to be mentally scarred again. Nightmares.
I think it was the comment of her being naked. He says, I don't want nightmares and those kinds of things. Like, well, what makes you think you look good naked, love?
Yeah,
that's what that was the initial thought.
Such a vulnerable situation, isn't it?
She's a woman, and she doesn't want to be, no, I don't think anybody, no matter what gender, would want that being said to them. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going in there to do the personal care. The thing is with personal care, it's a really sensitive thing. Yeah. It's really, really sensitive. So if you imagine a loved one at home washing your bits and bobs and you not feeling a slight sort of unease about it, whether it's your partner, your mum, your dad, whoever it might be, and then you've got a stranger standing outside a glass window saying your bits and bobs are going to give me nightmare. And this is somebody who is a professional who's trying to care for you. I can again only imagine how that would have made her feel. Personal care is a really intimate, personal thing to do, and it should not be taken lightly at all.
100%. So I think a lot of the issue boundary. I mean, the other one was the carers laughing through the window at the lady after she'd had her injection.
It's antagonising.
It was just so upsetting.
So they manoeuvred this patient onto her side. It was the language that was used around this. I just couldn't believe I was hearing, to be honest.
As if we'd choose to see your ass. I promise if you shit yourself, you will be clean.
After injecting Claire, they tell her she'll have to stay in the room for an hour.
They locked the door and they opened slats in the glass. They were laughing at her.
I'll see you in a bit. Have a nap.
Wolf pack behaviour.
Yeah, and that's
both
how
of them together.
A psychiatrist that was doing some feedback on it kind of described it, wasn't it? It's like a gang.
Ganging, yeah.
And it took you back to kind of old childlike playground. Like it's almost kind of a famous film, Lord of the Flies, where it's the kids are on an island and they start becoming tribal and it's us versus them, and it felt that kind of almost like a regression into playground like behavior in the way that we're interacting. And maybe it was that excuse to go into child state or whatever it was, but
a very immature mentality around that. And again, I can only think it was the power of authoritativeness that would have, we like doing this because we've got the control. So she says, please can I leave? So the service user shouted, please can I leave? And they went, no, and started laughing at her. Now, they could turn around and say, well, we was only joking.
Yeah.
But to that service user, like, please, I want to leave and I want to get out. She wanted to leave that vicinity, and they said no to her.
Yeah.
I know they released her, but even that, they released her.
Yeah.
It's awful.
I think so. Kind of combining those together as far as culture and boundaries are concerned, that kind of leads on to, so this is meant to be a therapeutic setting.
Yes.
And one of the things we teach a lot is like therapeutic relationships. And the therapeutic relationships is built around boundaries. It's caring, it's respectful, but it's also very boundaried.
Yeah.
In the fact that, you know, if I'm working with a service user or any person, I'm not their friend. I may be friendly, but it's not a two-way relationship. You know, if I meet a friend for a coffee, then I listen to their problems and we talk about it, and then hopefully they listen to mine and we talk about it. Whereas as soon as you're going into any kind of helping relationship, it's one way. It's a case, I'm here to listen to your problems. My problems I'll wait until I get home and I'll talk to my partner about. It's not to be shared in this moment. And I think you can see from those boundaries that were kind of being crossed throughout, but as well as a culture of that kind of derogatory, focusing on the negative, this bullying kind of culture that had kind of been created. Our overall aim for anybody in a mental health unit is improved outcomes, is getting better, is coping with life better. And I could see no evidence in any of the video,
none of them,
of where the actual therapy was coming into play. We're expecting people to get better, to improve their quality of life, to build self-esteem, to help them to cope with their emotions through just locking them in a room. And I just couldn't see. I mean, maybe that's something that wasn't shown, where the actual, you know, maybe they were doing counselling sessions and stuff, but I don't think
so. I think the guy, the undercover guide, said like there's supposed to be therapeutic activities that go on a day-to-day basis, but it was mainly people vaping and watching music videos. Now, there was a group of service users that went into each other's room and they engaged in their own activity in there by watching pornography, didn't they? Which obviously goes against policies and procedures there. So for them to be watching pornography, again, why is nothing else being offered? What else can they do? But the feeling was from that. And again, we could be completely wrong. We don't always know. But if the staff are sleeping on shift, it says an awful lot for what's going on with the service users.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit about, I mean, boredom. Any parent knows, and this is so simple and basic, isn't it? That if you leave your child with nothing to do, that child is going to find something to do that probably isn't going to be appropriate. They're either going to pester you, do something to get some attention, or they'll find something you don't want them to do. If you don't give them a toy, they'll start playing with your ornaments. And you know, it's so simple mentality, and I find it shocking that isn't then immediately adapted over to any setting. But again, you could say that, but I suppose how many of us, when we're very busy, have fallen into the trap of just sticking the kid in front of the TV and going, well, that can babysit you for a while. If you've got loads of stuff going on.
Yes, but you can have a lot of stuff going on. My problem is with those staff members, they seem to have the time to bully. They had plenty of time for that. When they wasn't doing their, inverted commas, observations, they had loads of times to be able to torment those service users. Even whilst there was in seclusion, they was going to harm nobody. They're still just standing outside tormenting them. They could have been doing therapeutic where they're like, we just want to talk to you. How about you come out for 5 minutes? We'll come and have a cup of tea together. There was none of that. So I don't believe for 1 minute any of those staff, none of them looked overworked. I know we've only seen a snippet. Don't get me wrong. Staff member care is overworked, understaffed. That's the problem. But they wasn't doing observations, and observation is going and looking and actively making sure someone's okay. What were they doing whilst doing that? They were all sleeping.
Today she's in charge of the ward, but she's taking a nap.
And she was out there for about an hour, properly fast asleep, in full view of the rest of the hospital.
It's not just Hannah. While I'm here, I see 6 other members of staff sleeping on shift.
If you feel undervalued, if you've got low self-esteem as far as your role's concerned, then it's not going to promote positive actions from anybody.
No, of course.
And I think that's the... we were having a chat last night, weren't we, as far as the principle of neuroregenesis, which is a relatively new understanding. And I think that ties in nice when we're working with those with dementia and things like that we found that once upon a time, it used to be thought that we have a limited amount of neurons, and as we get older, if we drink or bang our heads, they die, but we can't create any more. And now we're starting to learn that the more stimulating environment is actually the plasticity of the brain remains throughout life, and new neurons can be created. I think one of the things that I saw from that culture, from the environment, as well as being dark, dingy, minimalist, dirty, it wasn't in any way homely, it was very, very kind of clinical. And the overuse of seclusion and isolation as well. There was no stimulus. And I think I talk sometimes about what's called the rat park studies. So the rat park studies where rats put in a cage where they were given a choice between pressing a lever that would provide them with food or pressing a lever that would provide them with basically cocaine. The rats all chose cocaine over food, and they would starve themselves to get this dopamine hit of cocaine. And it was a big kind of study that showed the power of drugs and the power of addiction. But then they did a different version of this particular study where the rats were put in highly stimulating environments. They weren't just in a blank cage with no kind of support. They had socialization, they had engagement, they had activities going on in the environment. And that highly stimulating environment for the rats, they started taking the food. They didn't touch the cocaine, so they were getting their dopamine, they were getting their pleasure from the environment, from social engagement. And that was a real kind of turning point. And you could see there they had the two guys, one alcoholic and the one guy on crack and stuff, and they were absconding from the unit or leaving the unit to go and engage in those addictions again. I'm not surprised.
I'm not shocked, yeah.
I'm not shocked, because if there's nothing else to do other than sit, watch TV, vape and stuff like that, then of course they're going to regress back to or go back to things that actually give them pleasure, because they're not getting that pleasure from anywhere else.
It just wasn't, excuse me, an enabling environment in the slightest. So it's what's done and said that arises out of the person, but you have to do it with them. Yeah. And in that environment, it was a case of you fend for yourselves, and we will retaliate if you don't go or conform to our ideas.
And I think the guy said it. The guy who did the actual filming, he said at the end, didn't he? As far as the strength of the patients was just phenomenal. Being able to cope with that understimulating, boring environment. I mean,
because it became normal for them, didn't
100%.
it? 100%. Yeah.
But I know from personal experience, I've always not had. There's been times in my life where I've struggled with my own kind of mental well-being and stuff like that. And being on your own and having nothing to do and being left with nothing but your own thoughts is definitely not a positive thing.
It's not.
It tends to then deteriorate worse. And so I don't see the therapeutic benefit in that whatsoever, as far as just leaving people with their own thoughts. If those thoughts are negative, it's not going to improve their outcomes, reduce self-harm, reduce aggression through any of those actions, was it? And that kind of leads us on for us, the seclusion and the restraint side of things. The use of isolation was for me quite horrific. I think it was one bit where the lady was talking about that I used to be allowed 5 bears and a photograph, and she was just limited to having anything. Again, it's that massive level of understimulation within the environment that's not going to improve outcomes. It's not going to improve behavior. It's not going to improve positive engagement, self-esteem. It's only going to deteriorate it. So how are we looking to get a person better if we're just taking everything away from them?
Yeah.
Patients should only be isolated in seclusion when the behaviour is thought to be an immediate risk to others, and only for the shortest time necessary. During my time undercover, I see 10 patients held in these seclusion rooms, many for weeks on end.
The patients in seclusion can't even crack a window.
Harley's been in seclusion for more than 2 weeks. She's occasionally allowed out, but only into the room I'm observing her from. She too is being held in a seclusion room. I'm told she's attacked staff and has been locked up like this for more than a year.
She has only seen other people through a little pane of glass.
Alice is allowed 2 teddy bears and almost nothing else. Not even a photo of her granddad, who died while she was in here.
So the idea of seclusion or isolation is, again, it's that a minimum danger, and it should be for the shortest period of time.
Yeah.
These people was in there for the longest periods of time, but deprived of other things as well. So this particular girl that you're on about, she was allowed 2 teddy bears, and she had to knock on the window every time she wanted to see a picture of a deceased grandfather who died while she was in there.
Yeah.
And to deprive somebody of a photo, I don't know why, other than that it's quite callous.
I think there's almost there's a thing called the Allpot scale, and the Allpot scale is around prejudice and discrimination, and it looks at kind of the stages of discrimination that happen. It starts off with derogatory use of language, then it leads us into kind of reducing access to services and leisure and stuff like that, governmental. And the Allpot scale kind of draws out where people can get to the point of what the Nazis did as far as wiping groups of people out, because they dehumanized them. They saw them as less than human, less than themselves. But I could see an awful lot of that significant discrimination around within that. They were dehumanizing. They were, because you wouldn't treat an animal. You wouldn't put a dog in a cage with no stimulus, lock it away in a cage.
I think a family member stated that as well. She says you wouldn't treat a dog like that.
100%.
And I bet some of those staff members don't treat their dogs like that.
No, 100%. They wouldn't. They definitely wouldn't treat their own children like that.
Of course they wouldn't.
At least you would hope that they wouldn't, or their partner, or they wouldn't ever expect themselves to be treated that way.
Of course,
and that's the thing, isn't it? As far as there is susceptibility for all of us, with to at some point in our lives suffer from mental illness, and we may never reach it to a state where we need to be hospitalised or anything like that. But we all have that. There is always a possibility that any of us could become ill in some way. Circumstances, hereditary, whatever it is, and whether it be down to dementia or mental health illness or anything along those lines. We have to kind of think, it could be my family member is in there. It could be me that's in there. How would I want to be treated? And it's the golden rule, isn't it? Do what you want to be done by.
Yeah.
How would we want to be treated in that circumstance?
I definitely think for this, for as long as it was going on for, and the scale that we've seen it at, this must have been happening for a pretty long time for it to escalate and reach that scale. So like even with the restraining side of things, so with Harley, they sort of made a decision of how they were going to restrain her. Yeah. They went into a room and she was sitting on the floor. She's minimal risk down there. She's not a risk at that moment in time. They just went in, no therapeutic talking, no discussion, just went in and restrained her. And then they were shocked and surprised when she retaliated.
They decide Harley has to go back into seclusion. I've seen Harley do what she's asked before, but today that doesn't seem to be an option.
Someone just needs to go in and say to her, look, this is what's happening, and go. Literally just do it straight away. Yeah, there's no negotiation.
When we get to Harley, she's sat on the floor.
You don't get your chance to work if you want to do it. Let me get up there. What the fuck? What are you doing?
People, guys.
How's she going to trust anybody, if the people that are supposed to be looking after her in hospital treat her like that?
I teach a lot of restraint training. We're part of the Restraint Reduction Network. We're an Institute of Conflict Management. We do an awful lot, and our big thing is that restraint and seclusion. Any form of physical intervention should be an absolute last resort. And I think that's most of us now perceive that as the best case practice. There isn't many organisations out there that don't deem it like that. So it was really shocking to see that it wasn't the last resort, it was the first resort that they went in with.
Yeah.
There was no communication, de-escalation request.
Nothing.
It wasn't, we have tried everything else and this was the only option we had left. It wasn't about managing the risk. And one of the things that I'm trying to get over is that we should always use a least restrictive measure, least restrictive use of force. That doesn't mean that doing nothing, verbal is always the least restrictive, but it's least restrictive to manage the risk. With the seclusion, that wasn't the least restrictive to manage the risk.
No.
It's just a case of it's easier and quicker to lock her in a room, or quicker and easier to just go in and grab her and throw her in a room, rather than it was to actually communicate, try this, try that, try the other, monitor, supervision. And there was nothing appropriate. I mean, there was criticism about the chaos of the restraint, and I agreed with the guy from the nursing background there that the restraints aren't pretty. They're not always organised or anything like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was a language that was being used. There was no And the same thing happened when the lady was being injected as well, where they were restraining her and holding her to be rejected, which, I mean, that wasn't an approved kind of methodology or anything like that.
That was horrific to watch, because she was saying, please, I don't want it. I don't want it. They didn't weigh up any cost versus benefit. Like, would it be detrimental, or is just right now not the right time? Yeah. Can we document this and try again later? Yeah. They forced her. Yeah. It's abuse just on a massive scale. It is. That's what it is.
And I understand kind of that they could argue and they could potentially self-justify it that, well, she has to have a medication. She needs a medication. But it's still...
Yeah.
But why? You're doing it for therapeutic benefit, but then you're doing something that's significantly
Is it life-saving medication that she needs? And I think in my mind, I'd be able to say, oh, okay. But even the way that they went around it, they literally rolled her onto a side. So undignified.
Yeah.
And she was saying the words, she was saying, I don't want it. Yeah. Please, I don't want it.
There's even a point where I talked about, and it was Harley again, where they said they were putting into Seclusion, and I made a note of it. 2 staff went to put her in holds, and she kicked out of them, so she ended up then in 2 weeks of seclusion. And why is there I don't understand. And when we had a guy called Kev come in who had lived experience of being restrained and kind of came in and talked to us about our course and was involved in designing the course, he said, you have to remember, if you are taking somebody's control away from them, they will lash out in any way that they can.
That's very
normal. If you are doing something against their will, it is human nature to fight against that force. The other thing is human nature as well, and this is one of the things when I'm teaching physical intervention. If a force is exerted on us, we tend to instinctively counter that force with force. If somebody pushes me, my instinct is to lean towards the push, not to move away from it. If I've got a hold of rope and they're pulling it, my instinct is to lean back away. So again, even with the mechanics of this isn't something they plan to do. This is just the nature of, if you put force on me, I will counter that force with force. And again, that perception of that, so that's her kicking off, that's her behaving badly, that's her doing wrong. And the words and the terminology that they were using towards her, she was using back. They were calling her disgusting, vile, nasty piece of work, whatever. And she was throwing those words straight back at them as far as, get off me, you pervy man or creepy man, or whatever. I can't remember what it was that she was saying now. But
what shocks me, like, we understand a bit of flight, fight and freeze. I think most humans do nowadays. I mean, it's 2022. Yeah. We read a lot of stuff about the brain and why we react in certain situations and those things. These guys are healthcare professionals. Surely they would know they're putting somebody in a restraint without telling her why. Yeah. Why are you so surprised that she spat at you? Why are you so surprised because if somebody put you in restraint, you'd probably do the same. I struggle with that side of things. I struggle with the why are they failing to sort of understand that.
Yeah. And I think just that general, I think when I've looked at, done an awful lot of kind of study on good and evil and good and bad and whether people are innately evil and stuff like that. And one big thing and theme that seems to come across universally is that it isn't necessarily good or bad. It's a lack of empathy. That the people who have done innately evil things at that time, they've struggled to put themselves in the other person's shoes and see the world through their eyes. They have lacked that empathy to feel the feelings the other person's feeling. And I think what you saw there and what had happened within the setting is there was a complete lack of empathy across the board. Now, that's quite common in burnout and where individuals are overworked and overstressed and stuff like that. We tend to naturally lose empathy when we're not feeling very well, when we're tired, when we're kind of overworked. We lose that empathic feel sometimes. And I think you could see that across the board. There was just that. So whether there's a causal factor of being overworked or whether the culture was a lack of empathy, I would say it's a bit of a combination of all of it
think
together.
It's a combination, but it doesn't make me have any more empathy for them. I'll be completely honest with you. I feel very, very black and white about this subject. That was, again, abused just on a horrid scale.
Yeah.
And we can take into consideration like all those factors. I think being understaffed was probably one of the main things as well.
Factors, yeah.
And we have burnout and stuff like that. But for you to be able to treat another human being that are like that, they are vulnerable, they are there for a reason. I don't think the person's evil, but very lacking in knowledge. And
again, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be consequences for it. It's the same as like we know.
Well, there has been, hasn't there?
Yeah, and obviously I know a lot of them have lost their job and things quite rightly, and they shouldn't be in this career if they can't regulate.
They shouldn't be in the
like
care
that,
sector,
100%.
definitely.
But it's like speeding. Like most people have gone over the speed limit, especially when stressed because I'm running late, I'm going to do this. So suddenly that knowing good and right and wrong and acting in a rational way and looking at the consequences of behaviour starts to deteriorate. So, but it doesn't mean that speeding is okay. It doesn't mean if they then hit a kid and killed a kid because the kid ran out and they couldn't stop because they're going faster than the speed limit, then, it was okay, they were stressed.
Yeah. But I think just generally, so these, you know what public opinions are like. I've read a lot of comments and those kinds of things. I think even though that is a one-off incident but it's not necessarily one-off, it's a case of like this is actually happening underneath our noses. Yeah. I think it's a good thing that obviously that we know about it. It does make us rethink and it gets those conversations going. But unfortunately, I think it's just another nail in the coffin for the NHS in a way, and the stigma around the NHS that most mental institutions, that's the kind of perception now. When we was moving away from it, but we've kind of come back to it now. And it's the stigma against care, which is a real big shame, because I can honestly say a lot of carers, I very, very, very rarely ever meet a carer like how they behave.
100%. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's kind of a final thought, or bringing it to a close, that I would recommend anybody in care to watch this.
Yeah,
with
definitely.
An element of, and I used to show the Winterbourne View Castlebeck, and I used to say, look, this doesn't mean I think this could happen or would happen in your environment, is the way I put it. I don't think it would happen in your environment, but I don't want you to be under the misapprehension that it couldn't.
Yes.
And by watching it and forcing yourself to kind of pick up on those signs and question that, well, are the staff engaging therapeutically? Are we getting that culture of blame, criticism, negative, derogatory comments? Even if it's only happening in the staff room, it isn't happening in front of, but are they hyper-focused on the negative attributes of the service users rather than the positive?
Yeah.
So is there burnout going on? Is there poor culture? I think it's so important for whether it be management or individuals to kind of go, this isn't right. We need to change our mentality. We need to change our communication. We need to change what we're doing to improve. And obviously, it's a bad apple that spoils it for the rest, isn't it? That most care settings that we go to genuinely care,
there's
genuinely
so many
have really
lovely
good staff and do look after people in a very positive way.
Definitely.
But it's the bad ones that kind of spread, and it's the bad ones that that no person should have to experience those kind of environments.
No, definitely not.
So just as a reminder, it is available on YouTube. It's called Undercover Hospital, Patients at Risk. It's about an hour long. Have something lined up positive afterwards to bring your mood up, because it is quite an emotive watch. But I think it's really important that people watch it, educated by it, and use it as an example of what not to do, and learn from it as much as anything else. Yeah. Thank you for watching this episode of the podcast. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe to support us, or send us an email at podcast@able-training.co.uk to get in contact with any stories, questions or comments. Thank you very much.